the 1990s, India and China signed crucial agreements to ensure peace at their disputed and undemarcated border. They agreed on controlled overflight and to avoid heavy military deployments, including heavy weaponry, all to build confidence and ensure that war never takes place. For the most part, these deals were successful, but the summer of 2020 changed everything. A violent clash in the Galwan Valley took many lives on both sides. China's violent attempts to alter the status quo were pushed back upon by India, and a high-stakes standoff ensued for the next 4 years across the LAC. But finally, there seems to be a breakthrough, a consensus on bringing back trust and confidence-building measures. It started from the meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping in Kazan, Russia in October, and has progressed into a meeting of Special Representatives Ajit Doval and Wang, the first in 5 years, to discuss the border issue. And this meeting just took place in Beijing. But unlike the 90s, the situation today is different, and it might just be a new era in India-China ties as they undergo yet another transformation. So why does this meeting matter? What does it mean for the India-China border dispute, and what could be the future of India-China ties moving forward? This is Shubhangi Sharma for CNN News 18. Let's get started. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang and India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval held talks in Beijing today. What was on their agenda? To discuss the border issue at length and work on the momentum built in the last few months. This was the first meeting between special representatives since 2019. However, the two have met in other capacities to discuss the strained relations, and Doval was even invited to China by Wang in 2022. Top government sources told News 18's Manoj Gupta that everything will happen in national interest and no compromise will be made. Now, you might remember that in October, Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping met in Kazan, Russia on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. They achieved a breakthrough by agreeing on disengagement at two contentious points, Depsang and Demchok in eastern Ladakh. This enabled both armies to resume their mandatory border patrolling activities in these areas, something that had been restricted during the standoff. But this was not the end of it. Modi and Xi further directed the special representatives to take the baton and work further on the nitty-gritty of this resolution. When it comes to the resolution of the standoff across the 3,488-kilometer line of actual control, India emphasizes a 3D approach: disengagement, de-escalation, and de-induction. Disengagement has been completed in the two most crucial places, Depsang and Demchok, as stated by External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar.
We reached an agreement on patrolling, and with that, the disengagement, we have gone back to where the situation was in 2020.
But disengagement is just one part of the puzzle. De-escalation is the next step. This involves troops on both sides moving further back from their border to their original deployment points. And finally, de-induction, which requires China to withdraw troops from the Aksai Chin area back to their permanent bases in Tibet and Xinjiang. So make no mistake, this will be a long and painstaking effort. The only difference is that talks which were previously held by army commanders will be taken up at the special representatives level. This is a welcome development as it shows the seriousness of both sides to bring an end to this standoff. For China, it matters that India does not veer further away, as it's only going to get bumpy for Xi with Trump in the White House. China has also realized that there is no way that India is going to budge, as it has proved in the last 4 years. So China has been on a charm offensive towards India, and its messaging has been positive so far. Ahead of the meeting between Wang and Doval, China released a statement saying that it is ready to work with India to implement the common understandings between Prime Minister Modi and Xi to respect each other's core interests, strengthen mutual trust, and to, and I quote, properly settle differences with sincerity and good faith and bring bilateral relations back to the track of stable and healthy development as soon as possible. So, trust, respect, sincerity, and good faith. China is using all the words that India wants to hear at this juncture. And for obvious reasons, because the stakes are very high. The troop buildup along the LAC since the summer of 2020 has created a tense and volatile situation, bringing the two nations to the brink of war with more than 1 lakh troops deployed on both sides. Rebuilding trust now is a Herculean task, but both sides are trying to pick up the pieces. Following the meeting, the Chinese side shared a statement sharing 6 consensus points. These include an understanding on the resumption of pilgrimage at Kailash Mansarovar and cross-border trade at Nathula. They further agreed to work on the border issue and have a new round of special representatives meetings in India next year. Interestingly, one of the consensus points shared by China revolves around sticking to a 2005 confidence-building agreement, which defines the political guidelines as to how a border solution must be reached, considering, and I quote, historical evidence, national sentiments, practical difficulties and reasonable concerns, and sensitivities of both sides, and the actual state of the border. But China seems to have missed 2 equally important confidence-building agreements, which India will be having in mind. This brings us to an important time in history. It was only in the late 70s and 80s that India and China began to slowly repair the situation after strained ties following the 1962 war. After years of painstaking negotiations, in 1993, India and China signed the Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement, which would be a precursor to 2 more agreements in 1996 and 2005. Prime Minister Narasimha Rao visited China when this 1993 agreement was signed. So why am I talking about this agreement? Well, this agreement essentially laid out a framework for the 2 countries to peacefully manage their borders so as to ensure that war never takes place. This was also when the term Line of Actual Control, or LAC, was introduced. Then came an agreement on confidence-building measures in 1996, which went further into how heavy weaponry should not be deployed at the border, how military deployment shall be limited, and details as to how to deal with military exercises, air intrusions, overflights, and landings by military aircraft near the LAC. This deal basically aimed to prevent dangerous military activities near the LAC. Now, for the most part, these agreements had been successful in curbing a war-like situation between the 2 nations, but there have also been several violations, especially from the Chinese side. The worst one was in the summer of 2020 in the Galwan Valley, when a deadly clash took place between Chinese and Indian forces. In the next 4 years of the standoff, there was heavy deployment of military might on both sides. China's attempts to alter the status quo came at the cost of the sanctity of these crucial agreements. Therefore, restoring the spirit of these agreements is key to sustained disengagement, de-escalation, and de-induction. And this is a priority for India before economic ties can be normalized, albeit with checks and balances. You see, in the aftermath of the Galwan clash, there was an uproar in India against Chinese belligerence. India enforced a boycott of dozens of Chinese apps. It even banned TikTok on grounds of national security. Similarly, it put curbs on Chinese investments and ruled out the chances of Huawei's 5G services ever making a debut in India. But India did not stop here. It doubled down on the Make in India push, calling for an Atmanirbhar or self-reliant Bharat. This was in cognizance of the fact that, like most of the world, India relied on imports from China for all kinds of equipment, from mobile phones and computers to telecom equipment. This shift is underway now, and significant strides have been made to improve India's manufacturing capabilities, but at the same time, trade with China has only increased. It hit $136 billion in 2022. Most of this trade is what India imports from China. In other words, India's trade deficit with China has shot well over $100 billion, and this is a major concern. So while China's focus has been on the return of normalcy in ties, Ajit Doval is likely to also have raised India's concerns about the massive trade deficit with China, calling for a fairer and more balanced economic relationship. Other more immediate breakthroughs could also emerge with regards to the resumption of the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, relaxation of visa rules, and direct flight connectivity, all of which were suspended during the standoff. These talks are also important as next year, China is set to host the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, which could see high-level visits from India. So this meeting between Wang and Ajit Doval isn't just about resolving border tensions, it's about rebuilding trust. It is important to note that nothing is guaranteed from this meeting since we are dealing with China. There is no going back when it comes to the critical infrastructure that both sides have built along the border, so it's more about building confidence and setting a roadmap for the future. Moreover, for India, there is no going back from Atmanirbhar Bharat. India's quest for economic security will continue. And perhaps the most important point of all is that India is a major stakeholder on the world stage, and that's a reality that China will have to face as it deals with New Delhi here on out.